Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Unique Items. Today we're going to be going over the Barbarian unique sword known as Azurewrath. You can see it in all its splendor right here. It's a very pretty looking sword. Kind of looks like it's made out of ice and it's all chunked up and broken like a little bit. It's got little chips here, little cracks over there. Like it's actually made out of ice. Kind of very interesting, right? And let's actually have that popping up so you can see it. Now, the Azurewrath, I actually have a freaking really well-rolled Azurewrath. I'm actually pretty proud of this sword. This one is 925, of course. Came from Duriel, if I remember correctly. And it rolled 10% attack speed, which is perfect. In fact, you know what? Let's go ahead and upgrade this beauty, because then we can see what it's like with its full stats. I am running low on Forgotten Souls, though. So I might not be able to upgrade it all the way. No, okay, I did. Alright, so, as you can see, it has 15% attack speed. Because it's a sword, it does come with the innate 26.2% critical strike damage, though, which is very nice. And mouse doesn't want to stay on the doojang. As you can see, it rolls between 6.6 and 15% attack speed, which is absolutely crazy. I really do like the attack speed on this sword. In fact, I usually run the basic skills gain 30% attack speed. And interestingly enough, this would be half of your basic skills attack speed bonus, but it would be to everything, not just your basics. On top of this, we also have a really high non-physical damage bonus. So non-physical damage would be anything other than physical, so fire, lightning, ice, shadow, etc. It's a pretty high amount. There are some pretty interesting non-physical damage attacks within the game. So Barbarian has access to a really interesting fire damage bonus while berserking. There's also potentially Doombringer, which could give you a shadow damage bonus. Andariel's Visage could give you poison, and so forth and so on. There's a whole bunch of interesting like non-physical damage things that you could potentially pull into a Barbarian, and the Azurewrath is just another one of those non-physical damage options. So this would be pretty interesting if you were running some kind of non-physical damage Barbarian or Rogue. I believe Rogue can use this too, right? Or she can find it at the very least. I could be wrong on that, but to double check. The next one is core skill damage, of course, because this one is based around core skills. It's 18.8, 29.2% core skill damage, so you can see mine rolled pretty perfect there. And then we also have crowd-controlled damage to crowd-controlled enemies, which is a pretty nice one to have, especially if you're running crowd controls on a regular basis. Most barbarians have like 1 point in the bleed one, which gives them the slow, and there's a lot of different ways like stuns, immobilizes, all sorts of stuff, knockdowns, and whatnot. So there's a lot of stuff that counts as crowd control, so it's a pretty decent additive. Although if you're going for a specific build, you might be looking for something more like vulnerable or critical strike damage. With this particular build, I look for basic and so forth and so on. And then we also have the special effect. So the special effect is Lucky Hit. Your core skills have up to a 20% chance to freeze enemies for 3 seconds and deal 10,332 between 5,171 to 10,342 cold damage to them. Now, Azurewrath, unfortunately, because of that core skill thing, it's less useful than it would be otherwise. Now, hear me out. If I was spamming a basic skill, like, for instance, my Barbarian is, he's a basic Barbarian, so he spams basic skills all the time. I could get a lot of basic skills off really fast. And there's no limit to that either, because obviously I'm not limited by Fury cost, because obviously I can spam as much of any attacks as I want to for basic, or any attacks just in general. So any of my attacks can potentially proc effects, but I don't necessarily have to spend Fury to get those effects procced, right? So I can sit here and I can just like wail away at a target, right? Problem is because it's limited to core skills, it will never proc on anything other than core. Now, because it's core skills, you have to actually spam your core skill to make it happen. And it's going to happen less often because obviously you're only going to be able to get the effect when you have your resource. So if you have resource, you can spam it, but when you don't have resource, you can't spam it, which means that you're going to have less of these effects actually occur than what you would probably prefer. Now, the 20% chance to freeze enemies, though, is pretty cool because it gives you an ability to freeze the enemy solid. Freezes are actually really useful inside of group play as well. So if you're one of the people who likes to do group play, keep in mind that freezing targets can often mean extra damage for your allies. Like, for instance, if a sorceress is doing the Ice Spikes build or is using the Ice Heart Brise, which gets the free frozen effects when killing a frozen monster, or if you're with a rogue who is utilizing the Icy Alchemist imbuement, which also gives some pretty nice effects when you hit a frozen monster who is, with the Shadow imbuement and so forth and so on. So adding in additional freezes to a barbarian doesn't necessarily have to only benefit you, it can also benefit everyone around you. When the monster's frozen, he's not dishing out damage. This is also something important that you take into account, is that he's frozen, so he's not hitting me back, right? So it's a defensive mechanic also. The additional 10,342 cold damage, however, is not going to be the most amazing unless you're scaling it. So like many things in this game, if you're focused on shadow damage and you're scaling shadow damage, well, you're going to have really good shadow damage. So if you add in an additional shadow damage source of any type, well, then it's going to get scaled with all your other numbers. Well, if you're scaling physical damage and you add in cold, well, that's not really going to help you very much. So you'd have to actually scale this 10,342 damage to get a good number from it. And that's why before, when I was talking about the other elemental effects that you could potentially get on the Barbarian, and there is quite a few of them, between Doombringer, Azurewrath, the fire damage while berserking, Goer's, I think Goer's, isn't Goer's Devastating Grips fire? I can't remember if they changed that one or not. I think it used to be fire, but I think they may have updated it. Where's my Goers? Goers, where are you at, Goers? There they are. Yes, Goers is also fire damage, base damage to surrounding enemies as fire. So that's another fire damage that you could add in. And basically, if you continue down this road, you could potentially have a rather large amount of elemental damage. And then scale that elemental damage utilizing things like the effect that's on the sword. So you see it says non-physical damage. So you would go for non-physical damage scaling as much as you could possibly get. I believe there is some within the Paragon boards as well. I can't remember which Paragon board has non-physical damage scaling. I don't remember which one it is that has the non-physical damage scaling. It's been a little while. But you would have to build an entire character around the cold damage to actually get like a good effect from it, which kind of makes it more focused on the freezing effect and less on the damage that you're getting from the Azurewrath. Think about it less like okay, I got like 10,342 cold damage, and that's gonna be like 100,000 cold damage once all my modifiers apply, because you don't have any modifiers. So if you put this on a character, you're gonna kind of ignore the cold damage. I hate to say it. But the freezing effect is really nice as a defensive mechanic. It can also obviously help you because it creates the crowd-controlled option. Freezes actually work surprisingly well for staggering, too. And this is very important to take into account. So when you're trying to stagger a boss, if you want to stagger a boss, chilling effects don't work very well. I would recommend that if you're interested in what works the best for staggering and what works the worst for staggering, you take a look at my video on staggering. I actually did an entire testing video where I tested all the staggering effects. And one of the really good ones, the ones that applied the most stagger per use, was freeze. Freeze was at the top of the list. And this means that when you're fighting a boss with this particular sword, you're going to get some pretty nice freezes. And those freezes are going to stagger the boss relatively quickly. Obviously, they won't actually be frozen, but it will apply a large amount of stagger to their bar. On top of this, I mean, you also got the attack speed. You've got the core skill damage. It's not the best setup sword in the world, but it does have the critical strike damage if you're stacking that. So you're really only missing 2 out of 3 modifiers. Obviously, the crowd control could be something that you're scaling, but the non-physical damage might not help you out at all if you're not using any non-physical damage modifiers, right? So if you think about it from this perspective, there's one wasted stat on the sword. Like, if we looked at it from that perspective, just one wasted stat. All the rest of the stats on the sword are actually pretty good for just about any build that you might want to do. And the special effect with the additional freeze is actually pretty nice, too. I wouldn't really count on the damage, though, unless you're going to scale that. I really like the fact, though, that it has 15% increased attack speed. I feel like this kind of separates it from other swords that you might necessarily use in these slots, because you're not going to get attack speed on a sword unless it's in the aspect, which is interesting because, as you can see, I'm using basic skills 30% increased attack speed, right? Well, this would give me increased attack speed to all of my skills, not just the basic skills. And if used in combination with some other nice items, you could potentially get a rather large amount of attack speed to your core skills and things like that. I was thinking, and this is just my opinion, is that Azurewrath could be absolutely insane if you had the ability to spam a core skill. So there's a couple abilities that can actually do this. So one of them is Whirlwind. Whirlwind can actually, you can set it up so that it's a constant thing, which means that it's always being utilized. The downside of Whirlwind, though, is that attack speed doesn't really help it very much, which is unfortunate. So the attack speed on the Azurewrath would unfortunately get kind of wasted in this scenario. Another is for you to use Rend. Now, Rend can actually sustain itself through a couple aspects. So if you utilize the aspect that refunds core resource whenever you're utilizing Rend and you hit a certain number of targets, and then you also utilize the direct damage with Rend grants 4 Fury pure enemy hit up to a maximum of 20 Fury. You could potentially spam Rend indefinitely if you set it up properly, and utilizing Azurewrath, you could get that free freezing effect and the cold damage constantly on that. Also, Double Swing could probably do it too if you had something like Ring of the Starless Skies, or if you had just like an excessively large amount of resource regeneration. It would be a little bit difficult to set it up without something like Ring of the Starless Skies, but it could be done. In general, though, you have to spam a core skill to get the freezing effects, and, well, it just doesn't... It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. I don't believe you actually have to attack with the sword, though, so that's another very interesting point, is that you probably can still use your two-hander or your hammer or whatever it is that you're using for your main attacks. The flavor text on this particular item is the ancient runeblade of Angel Iswal. Azurewrath was miraculously spared the corruption that consumed its master. So in Diablo 2, Iswal betrays everyone, basically. You know, spoiler. And he actually goes to attack the Hellforge. And the reason why he was going to attack the Hellforge is because apparently there was another blade that was being made there called Shadowfang. And Shadowfang was supposed to be Azurewrath's equal. It's not a very good sword. Anyway, he ended up getting captured, and he ended up giving up the soul stones and everything about them to the primevals. And of course, this is Iswal's sword. It's a pretty interesting little weapon in Diablo 4. I'm not entirely sure I like how it's set up. I think, and this is just the way that I would fix it, is I would probably remove that core skills from the equation. I think open this up a little bit, make it so that it works on anything. Make it so that it works on basic skills, or when I'm using my ultimate, or when I use Death Blow or Rupture, or I kick something. Make it so that it works on everything, and I think this would be a much more interesting weapon, like across the board. But I think tying it specifically to the core skills, unfortunately, makes it a lot more niche and a lot less useful than it otherwise normally would be. I think that's pretty much everything for this. If you're looking for this particular sword, it does drop a lot from Duriel. You can find it in World Tier 4, and if I think you could find it sacred. I've never found one a sacred, but you know what? Let me know in the comments whether you found a sacred Azurewrath. I'd be interested to know. Generally, though, with weapons, you want to find them in the highest item power that you possibly can, and Duriel does drop guaranteed 925 items. So if you're looking for the highest item power that you can get, well, you probably just want to farm it from Duriel. That's probably your best bet. Barbarian, and I think I don't think the rogue has a chance to find the Azurewrath. I don't think she does. I'm pretty sure this is just Barbarian only. Doombringer, I think, is the one that has the ability to drop from with the rogue. Doombringer. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, guys and gals, and keep watching.